The morning rush at Bellini's wasn't for the faint of heart. Elena Vasquez balanced 3 plates of eggs Benedict up her left arm, while steering around tables with the grace of someone who had done this dance 1,000 times before. She delivered each plate with a warm smile, topping up coffee cups as she moved back toward the kitchen. "Order up for table 12, the chef's voice bellowed over the clatter of pans and dishes. Elena grabbed the next round of orders, pausing, only to wipe a bead of sweat from her brow. 5 hours into her shift and her feet were already screaming at her. But complaining wasn't her style. This job paid the bills, and in a city where rent climbed higher every month, that mattered more than comfort. "You're a machine today," Danny, another server, whispered as they passed each other in the narrow corridor between dining room and kitchen. "Save some tips for the rest of us." Elena laughed. "Just trying to finish early. I've got somewhere to be tonight." What she didn't mention was where that somewhere was. Her co-workers knew bits and pieces about her life, that she sent money to her grandmother back home, that she lived in a tiny apartment with a roommate, that she was always picking up extra shifts. What they didn't know was that 3 nights, a week, Elena slipped into a different world entirely. As the lunch crowd thinned out, Elena checked her watch. If she hurried, she might have time to practice before her evening class. She counted her tips, better than yesterday, and changed out of her black server's uniform in the cramped employee bathroom. The restaurant's owner, Mr. Rossi, caught her on her way out. "Elena, wait a minute." He waved her over to the bar, where he was going through receipts. "We've got that big catering gig next weekend at the Wilton. I need my best people there. Double pay. You in?" Elena hesitated. Saturday nights were when Professor Chen held master classes at the conservatory. She'd already missed 2 this month because of work. "It's the annual Arts Foundation Gala," Mr. Rossi continued, not noticing her hesitation. "Big shots from all over the city, the kind of people who tip very, very well. Money versus music. The eternal choice that had followed Elena for years." "What time would it end?" she asked. "Probably midnight, maybe later. But like I said, double pay plus tips." Elena did quick calculations in her head. The extra money would cover next month's piano rental fee with enough left over to fix the leaky sink her landlord kept ignoring. "Okay," she said. "I'm in." "Mister," Rossi clapped her on the shoulder. "That's my star. I'll put you down for the VIP tables." 40 minutes later, Elena pushed open the heavy doors of the city conservatory, a building that stood in stark contrast to the modern glass towers surrounding it. With its stone columns and worn marble steps, it felt like stepping into another century. Elena loved that feeling, the weight of history and tradition that came with classical music. She hurried down the hallway lined with practice rooms, most already occupied. Through each small window she caught glimpses of other students, proper music students with scholarships and degrees in progress, bent over instruments or standing tall by music stands. Elena found an empty room at the far end. The piano. Inside was old, its ivory keys yellowed with age, but the sound was still true. She set down her bag, pulled out wrinkled sheet music, and placed her hands on the keys. With the first chord, the tension in her shoulders began to release. Her tired feet and aching back faded from awareness as her fingers remembered their purpose. This was why she kept going. These moments when everything else disappeared. She was working through a difficult passage of Debussy when a knock interrupted her focus. Professor Chen stood in the doorway, her small frame nearly hidden behind a stack of music books. "You're early today," the older woman said, setting down her load. "Your shift ended early." Elena nodded. "Lucky break." The lunch crowd cleared out fast. Professor Chen moved closer, watching Elena's hands on the keys. "You've been practicing the piece I gave you." "When I can," Elena admitted. "Mostly late nights, after work. My roommate bought earplugs." The professor smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Elena, we need to talk about the scholarship auditions next month. Have you thought more about what I said?" Elena's hands stilled on the keys. Of course, she'd thought about it. She'd thought about little else. The full scholarship to the conservatory's performance program would change everything. No more double shifts, no more choosing between paying bills and pursuing her passion. I have, she said carefully. But Professor, the auditions are during the day. I can't miss that many shifts, and the preparation time. There are 23 hours in a day when you're not auditioning, Professor Chen said firmly. What you do with those hours is your choice. But I've taught here for 30 years, and I don't often tell students they should audition. When I do, I have my reasons. Elena looked down at her hands. Servers' hands with short nails and small burns from hot plates, calluses from hours of practice. Hands that belong to both worlds and fully to neither. You have something many trained musicians lack, Professor Chen continued when Elena didn't respond. When you play, people feel something. Technique can be taught, but that connection, that's rare. Before Elena could answer, the clock in the hallway chimed the hour. Other students began filing in for the evening class. The moment for private. Conversation had passed. Think about it, Professor Chen said, turning to greet the others. That's all I ask. The evening class focused on music theory, and Elena struggled to concentrate. Her mind kept wandering back to the scholarship, to Mr. Rossi's catering job, to the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen table. By the time class ended, her notebook was nearly empty of notes, filled instead with calculations and budgets scribbled in the margins. It was past 9 when Elena finally left the conservatory. The city had transformed in those few hours. Office. Workers replaced by theatergoers and diners. She passed restaurants with warm, glowing windows, catching snippets of laughter and conversation that spilled onto the sidewalk. Her own apartment was dark when she arrived. Her roommate, Lynn, worked night shifts at the hospital and wouldn't be home until morning. Elena was grateful for the solitude as she made a simple dinner of microwaved leftovers. She ate standing at the kitchen counter, flipping through a stack of mail. Bill, credit card offer bill. One envelope stood out. Thick cream paper with the Arts Foundation logo embossed in gold. Elena tore it open, curious. Inside was an invitation to the very gala she would be working. The Arts Foundation was honoring donors and announcing grant recipients for the year. There would be dinner, speeches, and performances by rising stars in the city's art scene. Elena's fingers traced the elegant lettering. In another life, she might have been one of those rising stars, might have been a guest rather than server. Her mother had believed that future was possible, had worked extra hours cleaning houses to pay for Elena's first piano lessons, had beamed with pride at recitals and competitions. After her mother's illness, everything had changed. The medical bills piled up and the piano lessons stopped. By the time Elena was 18, there were loan payments and a grandmother who needed support. Music became the luxury she couldn't afford. Elena pinned the invitation to the refrigerator, a reminder of Saturday's shift. Then she cleared a space in the tiny living room and set up her keyboard, a budget electronic model that was a poor substitute for a real piano, but allowed her to practice with headphones late at night. For the next 2 hours she worked through her pieces, repeating difficult passages until her fingers moved without conscious thought. It was nearly midnight when her phone buzzed with a text from Lynn. Rough night at ER, bringing leftover donuts from nurse's station, save me hot water for shower. Elena smiled and texted back a thumbs up. She should sleep. Tomorrow's breakfast shift started at 6, but her mind was too full. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched for information about the Arts Foundation Gala. Photos from previous years showed a glittering event. Women in evening gowns, men in tuxedos, champagne flowing freely. The foundation's director was quoted, "This annual event brings together the brightest talents and most generous supporters of our arts community." Elena closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. Two worlds, so close yet separated by invisible barriers. On Saturday, she would move between them, visible yet unseen. The waitress refilling water glasses while conversations about arts and culture flowed around her. Professor Chen's words echoed in her mind. What you do with those hours is your choice. Was it really? Choice implied options, alternatives, the freedom to decide. Elena had responsibilities, obligations that couldn't be ignored. Yet, as she finally drifted toward sleep, her fingers still moved slightly, playing phantom keys. In her dreams, the barriers dissolved, and music flowed freely between worlds that no longer seemed so separate. Lynn's key in the lock woke her briefly around 3 a.m. Elena heard the soft footsteps and rustle of scrubs being discarded in the bathroom. Then silence returned, and she slipped back into dreams of pianos and possibilities, of music that could build bridges between the life she had and the one she desired. The week leading up to the gala rushed by in a blur of coffee orders, piano, practice, and 2 short nights. Elena had picked up extra breakfast shifts to make up for the Saturday evening class she would miss. By Friday, dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes. "You look like you need this more than the customers," Danny said, sliding a fresh espresso across the break room table. Elena accepted it gratefully. "Thanks. Just one more day of madness, then I can sleep on Sunday." "About tomorrow," Danny leaned in, lowering her voice though they were alone. "I heard Mr. Rossi talking to the event coordinator. Apparently half the city's art scene will be there. Museum directors, gallery owners, even the conductor of the symphony." Elena's heart skipped. "The symphony conductor, are you sure?" "Positive. Mr. Rossi was practically bouncing off the walls about it. Said the restaurant might get a permanent catering contract with the Arts Foundation if we impress them." The news settled like a stone in Elena's stomach. She had known the gala would be full of important people, but the symphony conductor? The very person who could open doors she'd only dreamed of walking through, and she would be serving him appetizers. "Hey," Danny nudged her, misreading her expression. "Don't worry about it. They're just people who happen to have money. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like us." Elena forced a smile. "I know. I'm not worried." But as she finished her shift and headed to the conservatory for a quick practice session before her evening class, worry was exactly what filled her mind. Not about serving important people, she'd done that countless times, but about the collision of her 2 worlds. What if someone from the music world recognized her? What if Professor Chen was there? The thought made her steps falter as she climbed the conservatory stairs. The practice rooms were all occupied, so Elena sat on a bench in the hallway waiting. Through the windows of each door she could see students immersed in their art, a cellist swaying with eyes closed, a violinist making notes on sheet music, a pianist whose fingers moved so quickly they blurred. These were her people, in a way the staff at Bellini's could never be, despite how much she liked them. Here, no one looked twice at someone who would rather spend Friday night with Chopin than at a club. No one thought it strange to discuss the emotional nuances of a particular chord progression. The door to practice room 3 opened, and a young man with wild curly hair emerged, clutching a folder of music. "All yours," he said, nodding at Elena. "The sustain pedal sticks a bit, just warning you." Elena thanked him and slipped inside, the familiar smell of wood polish and paper welcoming her. She had 45 minutes before class, enough time to work on the Debussy piece that still gave her trouble in the middle section. She lost herself in the music, trying different approaches to a particularly difficult passage, when a knock interrupted her concentration. Professor Chen stood in the doorway, but she wasn't alone. Next to her was an older man Elena didn't recognize, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place among the conservatory's usual casual attire. "Elena," Professor Chen said. "Sorry to interrupt. This is Mr. Harlow from the Arts Foundation. He's visiting some of our classes today." Elena stood quickly, suddenly conscious of her waitress uniform she hadn't had time to change out of. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. Mr. Harlow shook it firmly. "Professor Chen tells me you're not actually enrolled here?" "I take evening classes," Elena explained. "I work during the day." "At Bellini's," Professor Chen added. "The restaurant catering our gala tomorrow night." Elena shot her teacher a surprised look. How did she know that? "What a coincidence," Mr. Harlow said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe in coincidences. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. Our pianist for tomorrow's event just canceled, Some family emergency. We're scrambling to find a replacement. Elena's pulse quickened. She looked at Professor Chen, whose expression remained carefully neutral. I mentioned to Mr. Harlow that some of our students might be available, the professor said. Particularly, those with experience performing under pressure. Mr. Harlow nodded. We need someone who can provide background music during the cocktail hour and dinner. Nothing too complex, just elegant ambience. It pays, of course. Elena's mind raced. Was this really happening? I'm actually working the event, she said, as a server. Ah, Mr. Harlow's interest visibly dimmed. Well, that's unfortunate. But I was just playing what you might be looking for, Elena said quickly. Would you like to hear it? Without waiting for an answer, she sat back down at the piano and began playing a gentle nocturne, the kind of piece that could fill a room without demanding attention. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, muscle memory taking over despite her racing thoughts. When she finished, she looked up to find both Professor Chen and Mr. Harlow watching her intently. You said you're working as a server? Mr. Harlow asked. Elena nodded. What if we hired you as the pianist instead? Same pay rate as we were offering the other musician. Elena's heart leapt, then just as quickly sank. I can't let Mr. Rossi down. He's counting on having enough staff and it's too late to find a replacement. Professor Chen stepped forward. Perhaps there's a compromise. Could Elena play for part of the evening? After her serving duties are complete? Mr. Harlow considered this. The most important time is during dinner, before the speeches and award presentations. If she could play, then... I get off at 8, Elena said. The dinner service should be mostly finished by then. That could work, Mr. Harlow said slowly. We'd need you until about 10 when the formal program begins. Elena looked at Professor Chen, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I'd need to bring clothes to change into, Elena said, and I'd have to clear it with Mr. Rossi. Leave Mr. Rossi to me, Mr. Harlow said with a smile that suggested he was used to getting his way. The Arts Foundation has a very good relationship with Bellini's. I'm sure he'll be amenable. After they left, Elena sat in stunned silence. Had that really just happened? She glanced at the clock and realized she was late for class. Gathering her things, she rushed down the hall, her mind spinning with possibilities and problems. The next day dawned bright and clear. Elena woke before her alarm, too anxious to sleep. She had packed a simple black dress and her good shoes in a bag, along with her sheet music, though she knew most of the pieces by heart. Mr. Rossi called while she was having her morning coffee. So you've been holding out on me, he said without preamble. Mr. Harlow tells me you're some kind of piano prodigy. Hardly, Elena said, embarrassed. I just play a little. A little? He said you're going to perform at the Gala. Why didn't you tell me you could play? Elena shifted uncomfortably. It never came up, and I'm still going to work my shift, Mr. Rossi. I'll only play after dinner service. Of course, he said. But this is wonderful. One of my staff performing for all those fancy people. It's good publicity for the restaurant. By the time Elena arrived at the Wilton Hotel that evening, her nerves were stretched thin. The hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed for the gala. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Tables draped in white linen circled a gleaming black grand piano on a small stage, and floral arrangements filled the room with the scent of lilies. The catering staff had a small room off the kitchen to store their things and take breaks. Elena tucked her bag in a corner and put on the black apron that marked her as Bellini's staff. Danny and the others were already preparing trays of hors d'oeuvres. There she is, our secret weapon, Mr. Rossi boomed when he saw her. The waitress, who's also performing tonight. All heads turned toward Elena, who wished the floor would open up and swallow her. You play piano? Danny asked, eyes wide. A little, Elena mumbled. Don't be modest, Mr. Rossi said. Mr. Harlow said you're very good. Good enough to save their event. Before Elena could respond, the event coordinator burst into the room. They're starting to arrive, she announced. Places, everyone. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Elena moved between tables with practiced efficiency, pouring wine, serving appetizers, and clearing plates. She was assigned to the VIP section, where the symphony conductor sat with museum board members and arts patrons whose names she recognized from the society pages. No one looked at her face. That was the thing about being a server. You became part of the background, invisible except when needed. Elena listened to their conversations as she worked, catching snippets about upcoming exhibitions, fundraising goals, and the state of arts education in public schools. At one point, she was pouring water for an elegant older woman when the symphony conductor mentioned a piece he'd recently conducted, the very Debussy composition Elena had been practicing. The third movement is particularly challenging, he said. Finding a pianist who can capture both the technical complexity and the emotional subtlety is nearly impossible. Elena's hand trembled slightly, water nearly spilling. She moved to the next glass, willing herself to remain invisible for just a little longer. As 8 o'clock approached, the main course was served, and Mr. Rossi appeared at her side. "Time for your costume change, superstar," he whispered. "We've got it covered here." Elena slipped away to the staff room, hands shaking as she changed into her dress. It wasn't fancy, just a simple black sheath she'd found on sale last year, but it was a far cry from her server's uniform. She applied a touch of lipstick, ran a brush through her hair, and took a deep breath. Through the door she could hear the hum of conversation from the ballroom, the clink of silverware against china, the occasional burst of laughter. In a few minutes, those sounds would fade, and all attention would turn to her. Elena closed her eyes and imagined her mother's voice. "Music is how we speak when words aren't enough." It was time to speak. Elena stood at the staff room door, fingers pressed against the cool wood. On the other side waited a world she had only glimpsed from the edges. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure everyone would hear it the moment she stepped into the ballroom. "You ready?" Mr. Rossi appeared beside her, straightening his tie. "Mr. Harlow is about to announce you." "I don't think I can do this," Elena whispered. Her mouth had gone dry and her hands felt cold and stiff, terrible for playing piano. Rossi's expression softened. "Cold feet, eh? Listen, I've seen you handle a full section of hungry businessmen during lunch rush without breaking a sweat. This is just another performance, but it wasn't." For years, Elena had kept her two lives separate, serving tables to pay bills, playing piano to feed her soul. Now those worlds were about to collide in front of the very people who could change her future. "What if I mess up?" she asked. "What if they laugh?" "Then you laugh too. Get up and try again," Mr. Rossi said simply. "But you won't mess up. I heard you practicing that fancy music. You've got this." Before she could respond, the door opened. Mr. Harlow stood there, eyebrows raised. "They're waiting, Ms. Vasquez. Are you ready?" No, she wasn't ready, but Elena nodded anyway and followed him into the ballroom. The space had transformed during her absence. The overhead lights had dimmed, leaving the tables in soft shadows while the stage area glowed under subtle spotlights. The grand piano sat, center stage, its polished surface reflecting the light like black water. Conversations quieted as Mr. Harlow approached the small microphone set up near the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "as many of you know, our planned entertainment for this evening had to cancel unexpectedly. However, we are fortunate to have found a remarkable talent to fill in. Please welcome Elena Vasquez to the piano." The applause was polite but distracted, the kind people give when they're more interested in their dessert than the entertainment. Elena made her way to the piano, feeling the weight of half-interested gazes. She recognized some faces from the tables she'd served earlier, though none showed any sign of recognizing her. She sat down at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed her hands on the keys. The ivory felt cool and familiar under her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the room full of strangers, and began to play. She started with something gentle, a Chopin nocturne that floated like a lullaby over the murmur of continued conversations. This was background music, after all. She wasn't there to command attention, but to create atmosphere. As she played, her initial nervousness began to fade. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend, reliable and understanding. She moved from Chopin to Debussy, keeping the volume subtle, the mood light. 20 minutes passed this way. Waitstaff, her colleagues, moved quietly between tables serving coffee and dessert. Danny caught her eye once and gave her a thumbs up that made Elena smile mid-phrase. Then something shifted. Elena had begun playing a piece by Einaudi. Contemporary, accessible but with an emotional pull that was hard to resist. She glanced up and noticed that the conversations had thinned. More people were watching her now, their desserts forgotten. Encouraged, she let herself play a little louder, a little more expressively. She'd spent so many late nights practicing these pieces, pouring her frustrations and hopes into the music when everyone else was asleep. Now she allowed some of that emotion to flow through her fingers. The final notes of the Einaudi piece faded, and to Elena's surprise, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. Stronger this time, more engaged. She looked, up to see Mr. Harlow nodding approvingly from the side of the room. Next to him stood Professor Chen, who must have arrived during the performance. Her teacher gave her a small smile and an almost imperceptible nod. Elena's confidence grew. She turned back to the piano and began a piece she hadn't planned to play, a Rachmaninoff prelude that was far more challenging, more passionate than the gentle background music she'd been hired to provide. Her fingers flew across the keys, drawing out melodies that soared and dipped like birds in flight. This was music that demanded attention, that spoke of struggle and triumph and longing. As she played, the room fell completely silent. She forgot where she was, forgot the fancy dresses and expensive suits, forgot that she had spent the earlier part of the evening carrying trays of appetizers for these same people. There was only the music speaking truths she could never put into words. When the final chord of the Rachmaninoff piece rang out, the silence that followed was profound. Then came applause, real applause, with some guests rising from their seats. Elena stood, slightly dazed, and gave a small bow. As she looked up, her eyes met those of the symphony conductor. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mr. Harlow returned to the microphone. Elena Vasquez, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take a short break, and then Elena will return for another set before our award presentations. Begin! Elena stepped off the stage on shaky legs. Professor Chen met her halfway to the staff room. That was not background music, her teacher said, but she was smiling. I got carried away, Elena admitted. Good. That's exactly what music should do. Carry us away. Professor Chen glanced around the room. You've certainly got their attention now. Do you see that man over there? The one with the silver hair? Elena followed her gaze to an elegant older gentleman deep in conversation with the symphony conductor. That's Philip Dorsey, Professor Chen said, head of the conservatory's scholarship committee. Elena's heart skipped. The scholarship committee? Here? They're everywhere in this room. The Arts Foundation funds half our programs. Professor Chen squeezed her arm. This is your audition, Elena. They just don't know it yet. Before Elena could respond, Danny appeared with a glass of water. Thought you might need this, she said, handing it to Elena. You were amazing. Why didn't you tell us you could play like that? Elena accepted the water gratefully. Thanks, I don't know, it just never came up. Never came up? Danny shook her head in disbelief. You've been hiding serious talent, girl. Mr. Rossi is over the moon. Says you're the best publicity Bellini's has ever had. Elena glanced around the room and noticed several guests looking her way, whispering behind cocktail napkins. Heat rose to her cheeks. I should get ready for the next set, she said. Use the time to rest, Professor Chen advised, and for the next set play what moves you, not what you think they want to hear. With that cryptic advice, her teacher moved away to join a group of conservatory faculty Elena hadn't noticed before. How many people from her music world were here witnessing this unexpected crossing of boundaries? In the staff room, Elena splashed cold water on her face and tried to calm her racing thoughts. The next set would be different. She'd be playing for an audience that was actually listening, including people who could open doors that had long been closed to her. A knock at the door startled her. Mr. Harlow entered, followed by the symphony conductor. Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Harlow said, allow me to introduce Maestro Vicente, conductor of the City Symphony. Elena wiped her damp hands on her dress before extending one to shake. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." The conductor's handshake was firm. "The honor is mine." That was a remarkable interpretation of Rachmaninoff. "Where did you study?" "I didn't. Not formally," Elena said. "I take evening classes at the conservatory when I can, but mostly I'm self-taught." Vicente's eyebrows rose. "Self-taught? And you work at the restaurant?" "Yes, I've been at Bellini's for almost 3 years." The conductor exchanged a look with Mr. Harlow that Elena couldn't interpret. "And how long have you been playing piano?" "Since I was 8. My mother cleaned houses for a family with a piano. They let me practice there sometimes." She didn't mention how those lessons had stopped when the medical bills started, or how she'd taught herself from books borrowed from the library, or the years when she couldn't afford a piano and had practiced finger exercises on tabletops. "Interesting," Vicente said. "Very interesting. Well, Ms. Vasquez, I look forward to your next set. Perhaps something from Bach. I'd be curious to hear how you approach his work." After they left, Elena sank onto a folding chair, trembling slightly. The conductor of the symphony had just requested Bach. From her, the waitress who had served his appetizer just hours ago. She had 10 minutes before she needed to return to the stage. Elena closed her eyes and ran through the Bach pieces she knew well enough to perform. The prelude in C major was too simple, the Goldberg variations too long. The Italian concerto, perhaps? The first movement had always spoken to her. Its joy, its forward momentum like a river that couldn't be stopped. When she returned to the ballroom, she found that the atmosphere had changed. The tables had been slightly rearranged to better face the piano. People who had been mingling now took their seats, conversations fading as she approached the instrument. This time, there was no announcement. Elena simply sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She looked up once, saw Professor Chen watching her, and began to play. The Bach flowed from her fingers with a certainty that surprised even her. This wasn't background music or accompaniment to dessert. This was her voice, speaking directly to each person in the room. She followed Bach with Beethoven, then a piece by Philip Glass that showcased her range. With each note, she felt more of her server persona falling away. Here, at this piano, she wasn't defined by her job or her circumstances. She was simply a musician, speaking the universal language of melody and harmony. When she played the final notes of a piece by Schubert, the applause that followed was immediate and genuine. Elena stood, slightly overwhelmed by the response, and gave a deeper bow than before. As she straightened, she caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the room. Lynn, her roommate, still in scrubs from her hospital shift, had somehow found out about the performance and slipped in to watch. The sight of her friend, grinning and clapping louder than anyone, brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. Mr. Harlow returned to the microphone as the applause faded. "Elena Vasquez, everyone. What an unexpected treasure we've discovered tonight." He turned to Elena. "Thank you for sharing your extraordinary talent with us." Elena nodded, suddenly too emotional to speak. As she left the stage, people reached out to touch her arm, to murmur compliments. A path seemed to clear toward Lynn, who engulfed her in a fierce hug. "That was incredible," Lynn whispered. "I'm so proud of you." "How did you know?" Elena asked. "Danny called the hospital, said I wouldn't want to miss seeing my roommate become a star." Before Elena could respond, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Philip Dorsey, the scholarship committee head, holding out a business card. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, "I believe we have some things to discuss about your future. Would you be available to come to my office on Monday morning?" Elena took the card with trembling fingers. "Yes," she said. "I'll be there." As Dorsey moved away, Lynn squeezed her arm. "What was that about?" Elena looked down at the card, then back at her friend. "I think," she said slowly, "it might be about becoming the person I was always meant to be." Elena barely remembered returning to the stage for her final set. The world had tilted on its axis, leaving her dizzy with possibilities. Philip Dorsey's business card felt like a winning lottery ticket in her pocket. Mr. Harlow had asked her to play until 10 o'clock, when the formal award presentations would begin. She had 20 minutes left, 20 minutes to show everyone in this room who she truly was. As she settled at the piano again, a hush fell over the crowd. She noticed that even the waitstaff, her colleagues, had paused their duties to listen. Danny stood near the kitchen door, giving her a thumbs up. Mr. Rossi watched from near the bar, chest puffed with pride, as if Elena were his own daughter. She began with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that started gently but built to a passionate complexity that showcased technical skill and emotional depth. The notes flowed from her fingers without conscious thought. Years of practice, of playing until her hands ached, of falling asleep with melodies running through her head, all of it had led to this moment. As the piece reached its climax, Elena allowed herself a glance at the audience. The room was completely still. The elegant woman who had earlier complained that her fish was overcooked now sat with tears streaming down her face. The businessman who had barely looked up from his phone during dinner was leaning forward, utterly captivated. And in the back, half hidden by a column, stood Professor Chen. Her teacher watched with a slight smile, eyes gleaming with what might have been pride. The final notes of the ballad rang out, followed by a moment of complete silence before the room erupted in applause. Elena stood and bowed, then sat again without waiting for the applause to fade. She moved directly into her next piece, a Gershwin prelude that showcased a completely different style, playful and American in contrast to the European romanticism of Chopin. The audience responded with delighted smiles, some people nodding in recognition of the familiar melody. Elena felt something unlock inside her chest. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about sharing the joy that music had always brought her, even during the hardest times. For her final piece, Elena chose something unexpected, a composition of her own that she had been working on during late nights when sleep wouldn't come. It was simpler than the classical masterpieces she'd played earlier, but it contained pieces of her soul that no other music could express. She played the opening notes. She saw confusion flicker across some faces. This wasn't a piece they recognized, but soon, the confusion gave way to something else. A deeper listening, an engagement with something new and authentic. Elena poured everything into those final minutes. Her mother's sacrifice to give her early lessons, the years of struggle after her mother's death, the late nights practicing on a keyboard with headphones while Lynn slept, the constant juggling of her two worlds. All of it flowed through her fingers and into the waiting air. When she played the final chord, the silence that followed felt sacred. Then came the applause, not polite or even enthusiastic, but thunderous. People rose to their feet, some calling bravo. Elena stood, trembling slightly, and bowed deeply. Mr. Harlow approached the microphone. Elena Vasquez, ladies and gentlemen, what an extraordinary gift you've given us tonight. He turned to Elena. That final piece, I don't believe I recognized it. Elena leaned toward the microphone. It's something I've been working on, she said simply. A murmur ran through the crowd. The conductor, Vicente, raised his hand slightly, catching Elena's attention. You compose as well? He asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Heat rose to Elena's cheeks. I try, she said. I'm still learning. We are all still learning, Vicente replied with a warm smile. That's what makes art a living thing. Mr. Harlow glanced at his watch. And now we must move on to our award presentations. Elena, thank you again for sharing your remarkable talent with us tonight. Please, everyone, another round of applause for Elena Vasquez. The room obliged enthusiastically. As Elena stepped away from the piano, people reached out to touch her arm, to offer congratulations, to press business cards into her hand. She moved through them in a daze, making her way toward the staff room where she could change back into her uniform and process what had just happened. She had nearly reached the door when she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to find the elegant older woman who had been moved to tears by the Chopin. My dear, the woman said, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Catherine Webb. The name registered immediately. Catherine Webb was one of the city's most prominent arts patrons with a wing of the art museum named after her family. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Webb," Elena said, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and lack of jewelry. "The honor is mine," Catherine replied. "That was a performance I won't soon forget. Tell me, do you have management, a recording contract?" Elena couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips. "No, nothing like that. I work at Bellini's. I'm actually supposed to be serving dessert right now." Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "You're part of the catering staff?" "Yes. Mr. Harlow asked me to fill in when their pianist canceled." "How extraordinary," Catherine murmured. She studied Elena's face for a moment. "You know, I host a small concert series at my home each month. Nothing too formal, just a gathering of people who appreciate good music. I would be delighted if you would consider performing at our next event. It pays, of course." Elena blinked in surprise. Thank you. I'd be honored." "Wonderful." Catherine reached into a small purse and extracted a business card far more elegant than Philip Dorsey's. "Call my assistant on Monday. We'll make all the arrangements." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And between us, if you're looking to make a change in employment, I know several people who would be interested in supporting a talent like yours." With that, she glided away, leaving Elena staring after her in disbelief. The staff room was empty when Elena finally reached it. She sat heavily on a folding chair, legs suddenly too weak to support her. 3 business cards lay in her hand, Philip Dorsey's, Catherine Webb's, and another from a music producer whose name she recognized from album covers. The door opened, and Danny burst in. "There you are. Everyone's looking for you, Mr. Rossi." "Is practically floating. Says you've made Bellini's famous overnight." She stopped, noticing Elena's dazed expression. "Hey, you okay?" "I think so," Elena said slowly. "It's just a lot to take in." Danny sat beside her. "I can imagine. One minute you're serving appetizers, the next you're a star." She nudged Elena's shoulder. "I always knew there was something different about you. The way you'd hum while prepping, the tables or tap rhythms on the counter during slow moments. I never thought anyone noticed," Elena admitted. "We noticed. We just didn't know what it meant." Danny gestured to the cards in Elena's hand. "Important people?" Elena nodded. "Very. So what happens now? You gonna quit Bellini's and become a famous pianist?" It was a question Elena hadn't allowed herself to consider, even during her most hopeful moments. The practical side of her, the side that kept track of bills and rent due dates, immediately began calculating risks. But another part, the part that had been awakened on stage tonight, whispered of possibilities too beautiful to ignore. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I think things are going to change." Danny squeezed her arm. "Good. They should." She stood up. "Now, you going to change back into your uniform? Mr. Rossi says you don't have to, but the dessert station is swamped." Elena looked down at her simple black dress, then at the server's uniform hanging on a hook. For 3 years she had worn that uniform without complaint, grateful for the steady income it provided. Tonight, for the first time, she had shown the world who she truly was. Going back into that uniform felt impossible now. "Tell Mr. Rossi. I'm sorry," she said, standing up. "I can't. Not tonight. But I'll work a double shift tomorrow to make up for it." "Are you kidding?" Danny laughed. "You just made this event a success. Mr. Rossi will probably pay you to sit at the piano in the restaurant from now on. Actually," she added, tilting her head thoughtfully, "that's not a bad idea. I should suggest it to him." Before Elena could respond, there was another knock at the door. Professor Chen entered, followed by Vicente, the symphony conductor. "I hope we're not interrupting," Professor Chen said, though her tone suggested she didn't really care if they were. "Maestro Vicente has something he'd like to discuss with you, Elena." Danny took the hint. "I'll go help with dessert. Find me before you leave, okay?" She slipped out, closing the door behind her. Vicente clasped his hands behind his back, studying Elena with an intensity that made her nervous. "Ms. Vasquez," he began. "That was quite remarkable, particularly for someone without formal training. Your technique has some interesting quirks, but your musicality is undeniable." "Thank you," Elena said, unsure if she'd just been complimented or criticized. "The symphony has a special performance scheduled next month," Vicente continued, "a celebration of new talent. We had planned to feature young musicians from the conservatory, but I would like to include you as well." Elena's heart leapt. "Me? Playing with the symphony?" "A short solo piece," Vicente clarified. "The Gershwin, perhaps, or your own composition, which I found quite intriguing. You would be compensated, of course." Professor Chen beamed at Elena. "It's an incredible opportunity. Very few students get the chance to perform with the symphony." "But I'm not even a student," Elena said. "Not really." "That," said Philip Dorsey, appearing in the doorway, "is something we need to discuss." He nodded to Vicente and Professor Chen. "I see you've beaten me to her. Not surprising." Elena felt like she was dreaming. 3 of the most influential people in the city's music world were standing in a cramped catering staff room, discussing her future as if she actually had one in music. "Mr. Dorsey," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "About Monday's meeting." "Let's discuss it now," he interrupted. "No sense in waiting. Professor Chen has told me about your situation. The scholarship committee has funds specifically for cases like yours. Exceptional talent facing financial barriers." He adjusted his glasses. "We would like to offer you a full scholarship to the conservatory's performance program, beginning next semester." Elena grabbed the edge of the folding chair to steady herself. "A full scholarship? Tuition, books, even a small stipend for living expenses," Dorsey confirmed. "Though based on tonight's performance, I suspect you'll have additional income opportunities if you wish." "I still need to work," Elena said automatically. "I have responsibilities. My grandmother." "There are work-study positions within the conservatory," Professor Chen interjected. "Teaching beginner students accompanying voice classes, less demanding than restaurant work and more relevant to your studies." Elena looked from one face to another, searching for the catch, but that would bring this dream crashing down. "This is really happening?" she asked finally, her voice small. Vicente smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Ms. Vasquez, in my 30 years conducting orchestras around the world, I have learned one thing. True talent cannot be kept hidden forever. It finds a way to shine through even in the most unlikely circumstances." He gestured to the door, beyond which the gala continued. "Tonight your talent found its moment. What happens next is up to you." Elena took a deep breath. The practical voice in her head listed all the reasons to be cautious, the years of struggle, the responsibilities that wouldn't disappear, the risks of changing course. But louder than that voice was the memory of how it felt to play her music for people who truly listened, who were moved by what they heard. "I want this," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want to study, to improve, to see how far I can go." Professor Chen nodded, satisfied. "Then it's settled. We'll handle the paperwork on Monday." As they filed out, making plans for her future as casually as if discussing the weather, Elena remained seated, overwhelmed by the speed with which her life had changed. Through the open door, she could hear the gala continuing, Mr. Harlow announcing award recipients, applause, the clink of glasses. Somewhere in that room her co-workers were serving dessert, clearing plates, filling water glasses, all the tasks she had performed countless times. Tonight, she had stepped away from that role and shown the world her true self. And somehow, miraculously, the world had responded with open arms. 3 months had passed since the night of the Arts Foundation Gala. Spring had given way to summer, bringing hot, sticky days that made the city feel like it was moving in slow motion. But for Elena, life had accelerated to a pace that left her breathless. She stood outside Bellini's restaurant, keys in hand. The morning sun reflected off the windows where a "Help Wanted" sign hung. It was Sunday. The restaurant was closed, the street quiet except for the occasional car. Taking a deep breath, Elena unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee and garlic welcomed her, along with the silence that only empty restaurants possess. "Hello?" she called out. "Mr. Rossi?" "In the office," his voice boomed back. Elena made her way past the bar and through the swinging kitchen doors. Mr. Rossi's office was really just a desk wedged into a corner of the dry storage room. He sat there now, surrounded by invoices and schedules, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as she entered, a smile spreading across his face. There she is. The famous pianist returns to visit the little people. Elena rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling back. "I've hardly gone Hollywood, Mr. Rossi." "No?" "3 newspaper articles, a spot on local morning television, and I hear your concert with the symphony sold out in 2 days." He removed his glasses. Not bad for someone who was carrying plates a few months ago. Elena set a small gift bag on his desk. "I brought you something." Mr. Rossi peered inside and pulled out a framed photo. Elena at the piano during her symphony debut last month, captured mid-performance with the orchestra behind her. She had signed the bottom corner. "To Mr. Rossi, who gave me the first stage, thank you." "Elena." "Bah," he said, but his eyes had grown suspiciously moist. "You make it sound like I did something special. I just needed a waitress who didn't drop things." Elena leaned against the desk. "You did more than that. You were flexible with my schedule so I could take classes. You let me switch shifts when I had performances. She paused, searching for the right words. "You treated me like a whole person, not just an employee." Mr. Rossi waved away her gratitude. "So what brings you by?" "Not that I'm not happy to see you, but I figured you'd be busy with your fancy new life." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." Elena twisted the strap of her purse nervously. "I've been thinking about my last regular shift here." After the gala, Elena had continued working at Bellini's part-time while beginning her scholarship-funded studies at the conservatory. But as performance opportunities increased and her class schedule intensified, her hours at the restaurant had gradually decreased. 2 weeks ago, she had worked her last regular shift. "You were a good waitress," Mr. Rossi said. "One of my best, but we both know that's not what you were meant to do." "That's just it," Elena said. "I've been thinking about what I want to do when I'm not performing or studying." She took a deep breath. "I want to start a music program for kids who can't afford lessons." Mr. Rossi's eyebrows shot up. "A music program?" Elena nodded. "When I was little, my mom cleaned houses for people who had pianos. That's how I first got to play. But so many kids never get that chance, especially in our neighborhood." She had been turning the idea over in her mind for weeks now. Her own story had received enough publicity that people recognized her on the street sometimes, especially in the working-class neighborhood where she'd grown up. Children would approach her, asking about the piano, about how they could learn to play. "I need a space," she continued, "somewhere centrally located, accessible by public transportation, somewhere kids would feel comfortable coming after school." She met Mr. Rossi's eyes. "I was thinking about the room upstairs, the one you use for storage." The second floor of Bellini's had once been used for private parties, but rising costs had made it more profitable for Mr. Rossi to rent out the main dining room for events and use the upstairs for storage. "You want to turn my storage room into a music school?" Mr. Rossi asked, his expression unreadable. "Just afternoons, 3 days a week to start," Elena said quickly. "I could pay rent, though not much at first, but I have some grant applications in process, and Catherine Webb has offered to help with initial funding." "Catherine Webb? The museum lady?" Elena nodded. "She's been incredibly supportive, and Professor Chen from the conservatory has offered to help find volunteer teachers, advanced students who need teaching experience." Mr. Rossi leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've really thought this through." "I have." Elena pulled a folder from her purse and placed it on the desk. "Here's the business plan, such as it is. Take some time to look it over. Talk to your accountant." If it doesn't make sense for Bellini's, I understand. Mr. Rossi didn't touch the folder. Instead, he stood up and walked to a small window that overlooked the alley behind the restaurant. You know, he said after a moment, my grandmother taught piano back in Italy. Nothing fancy, just village children, a few coins per lesson, but she believed music was not just for the rich. He turned back to Elena. The room needs work. New flooring, paint, proper lighting. The old piano up there is probably beyond saving. I know, Elena said. I've budgeted for renovations, and I've found a dealer who will provide a used upright, at cost. Mr. Rossi nodded slowly. Do it, he said. But I have conditions. Elena held her breath. What conditions? First, you don't pay rent. Not at the beginning. We can revisit when you're established. Mr. Rossi, I can't. He held up a hand to silence her. My restaurant, my rules. Second condition, you play here once a month. A small recital for my customers. Good culture, good publicity. Elena smiled. I think I can manage that. Third condition, Mr. Rossi continued, his voice growing softer. You name it after your mother. She gave you your first chance at music. It's only right. Tears pricked at the corners of Elena's eyes. How did you know about my mother? Mr. Rossi shrugged. You mentioned her once or twice, and I read the articles about you after the gala. He returned to his desk and finally opened the folder she'd brought. Now show me this business plan of yours. If we're going to do this, we'll do it right. An hour later, Elena left Bellini's with a set of keys to the upstairs room and a heart full of possibilities. The summer heat hit her like a wall as she stepped onto the sidewalk, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already upstairs, arranging the space, hearing the sounds of children discovering music for the first time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lynn. Truck's all loaded. Just waiting for you. Elena had almost forgotten. Today was moving day. After 3 years in their tiny apartment, she and Lynn were moving to a slightly larger place closer to both the conservatory and the hospital where Lynn worked. The timing couldn't have been better. With Elena's new teaching and performing income combined with Lynn's recent promotion, they could finally afford an apartment with actual bedroom doors and a living room big enough for Elena's piano. Elena hurried to the bus stop, mentally reviewing everything that had changed in just 3 months. The scholarship, the symphony performance, the private recitals at Catherine Webb's home that had led to more opportunities, more connections, the record label that had expressed interest in her original compositions, and now the music program that would allow her to give back. None of it had been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of wondering if she was reaching too far, of fearing that her good fortune would evaporate as quickly as it had appeared. The scholarship covered her tuition, but not all her living expenses. The hours of practice required at the conservatory level left her exhausted. Some of her new peers, students who had trained at prestigious music schools since childhood, viewed her with suspicion or even resentment. But every time doubt crept in, Elena remembered the night of the gala, the feeling of finally being seen for who she truly was, not just for the role she played to survive. The bus arrived, already crowded with Sunday shoppers. Elena squeezed into a seat near the back, next to an older woman with grocery bags at her feet. Hot day, the woman commented. Elena nodded. Too hot. Where you headed, dear? Home, Elena said. Well, my new home. We're moving today. That's nice, the woman said. Moving up in the world? Elena considered the question. Was she moving up? Her new apartment was hardly luxurious. Her bank account, while healthier than before, couldn't be described as wealthy. She still took the bus instead of taxis, still clipped coupons, still worried about making ends meet. But in other ways that couldn't be measured in square footage or dollars, she had indeed moved up. She had found a path that honored both her talent and her history, that allowed her to be fully herself without forgetting where she came from. Yes, she told the woman. I guess I am. When Elena arrived at her old apartment building, she found Lynn directing 2 friends as they attempted to maneuver a sofa through the narrow doorway. Boxes were stacked on the sidewalk next to a rented truck, each labeled in Lynn's precise handwriting. Kitchen, bathroom, Elena's music. There you are, Lynn called out. How did it go with Mr. Rossi? He said yes, Elena replied, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. We can use the space. That's amazing. Lynn abandoned the sofa situation to give her a quick hug. The Elena Vasquez Music School for Underprivileged Youth is officially happening, Elena laughed. That's not what it's going to be called, and it's not a school exactly, more of a program, at least to start. Whatever you call it, it's going to be incredible. Lynn returned to the doorway where the sofa remained firmly stuck. Just like everything else you've done lately. As Elena joined the moving effort, directing and carrying boxes, she reflected on Lynn's words. The past 3 months had indeed been incredible, almost like a dream. But it was the future that truly excited her now. Not just her own future as a musician, but the futures she might help shape through her teaching program. She paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the apartment where she had spent 3 years balancing two worlds. The practical reality of paying bills and the seemingly impossible dream of a life in music. So much had changed since the night she stepped onto the stage at the Wilton Hotel. Yet in many ways, she was still the same Elena who had worked double shifts and practiced piano late into the night. The difference was that now she no longer had to choose between her worlds. She had found a way to honor both, the disciplined worker who understood the value of persistence and the artist who could move people through music. Hey, daydreamer, Lynn called from the truck. These boxes won't move themselves. Elena smiled and picked up a box labeled sheet music. Her arms full of possibilities, she stepped toward the waiting truck and whatever came next. Later that evening, after the moving truck had been returned and pizza ordered to christen the new apartment, Elena sat at her piano in its new spot by the window. The last rays of sunset filtered through blinds they hadn't yet figured out how to operate, casting golden stripes across the keys. She played softly, not practicing, just letting her fingers wander where they wished. From the kitchen came the sounds of Lynn unpacking dishes, humming along absently to Elena's improvisation. On the wall above the piano hung a single framed photo, not the professional shot from the symphony performance, but a candid image Danny had taken on her phone the night of the gala. In it, Elena sat at the grand piano, her back to the camera, facing a room full of people who had stopped mid-conversation to listen. It was a moment captured between two lives, the one she had lived for years and the one that was just beginning. A moment when a waitress had silenced a luxury gala with her piano magic, and in doing so, had finally found her true voice.